Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 34 of the Backyard Banter Podcast. It's fantastic to be here with you all again today. My name is Matt Harmon, and I'm hosting the show here, and I've got a great guest today, someone I've been excited to have on for a little while now. It's Field Yates from ESPN. Used to work with the old NFL as well, too. So, Field, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well, Matt. I appreciate you having me on. Seen the podcast before, and I think it's nice way to sort of weave the fantasy community together. But also, we're not exclusively talking about fantasy football, which is I don't say a nice change of pace because we don't love what we do, but it's cool to you follow people on Twitter, you interact with them in a variety of ways, you compare rankings, all this stuff, but you don't necessarily get to know the guys or girls involved in this community outside of that. So it's nice to sort of veer into a different lane and have a little bit of an opportunity to get to know people on a different level.
I totally agree. And the cool part about doing this for me is that people have said, like, people that don't even like fantasy football or don't particularly care about it, like, have said they just enjoy listening to the stories. And that's pretty cool for me. I appreciate that, we're in each other's lives so much. It's nice to actually know a little bit about each other for sure.
No question.
And so let's start to get to know a little bit about you, Field, and also just a word of caution to the listeners and to you as well. I forgot to tell you this before we started recording. They're doing work on my street, so if it sounds like a war zone over here, we'll power through it. But Field, we'll start with your background a little bit. So I always start the podcast by asking the guest, how did you come to kind of get the bug for football, and how did you come to fall in love with it?
Yeah, football for me has really been my entire life. I knew at an early age I was not going to play football in the National Football League. But I can't even remember when I first picked up a football. But I know my obsession grew early on in my life. I played. I was a high school and college football player. I played at Wesleyan University, which is a Division III school in Middletown, Connecticut. So I don't broadcast much about my career because, frankly, I was not much of a football player. But it allowed me. It was part of my college experience, something I always remember fondly. But I knew early on that I wanted to be involved with the game. And actually, the current role that I have is entirely by accident. What I really wanted to do was be an NFL head coach. So I was fortunate to, when I was very, very young, probably around 13, 14 years old, start doing some basically going to Patriots little rookie mini camps and other being around Foxborough. I'm from the Boston area, so being around there for some mini camps and other small, not quite training camp stages. And this was even before some of the current infrastructure that's involved with the NFL offseason was in place. And sort of just being a ball boy, being a drill guy, being whatever they needed, someone to do, grab water, you name it. And then after my junior year of high school, I started doing what I call an internship, but an internship really isn't necessarily the appropriate term because it's not like it was something that was readily available to apply. It was right place, right time, knowing a few of the right people to start this internship. Basically every summer and every day I had off from between junior and senior year up through basically until the summer before my senior year of college. I was working with the Patriots doing a variety of scouting and coaching and other tasks. And basically what I tell people is that when you're entering the NFL in that capacity, essentially what you're doing is it's like, Rosetta Stone football style, right? In order to be able to scout a football player, I shouldn't say in order to, but one of the best ways to be able to scout a football player fluently or to be able to, effectively is to learn what it means to scout a player and learn how to speak scouting lingo. That's not to say that there's only one way to do a scouting report, but that certain teams have certain ways, whether it's traits they're looking for, whether it's language they describe their reports in, other things that you had to learn. And for me, that was a lot of my sort of fundamental information that I was gathering my first couple of years doing that with the Patriots. And then after I graduated from college, I was able to go, I got hired by Scott Pioli, who's now the Falcons assistant general manager, who previously was the chief general manager, to go work in his scouting department out in Kansas City. Which was great. It was one of those experiences that I'll never, ever, ever forget. I had some chances to do some coaching work too. My second season out in Kansas City, so I was basically doing entry level stuff in both of those jobs. And for scouting, it's making point of attack tapes, which are basically when the draft rolls around. It's kind of like how Draft Breakdown covers the good, bad, and ugly of players for us who are watching it online. And you imagine a general manager's having to scout thousands of prospects or 1,000 prospects per year. rather than having him pour over, 15 game tapes and try to find every play that, a nickel cornerback is involved in. You've got guys in the lower levels who are going through the tape of all of his games and picking out the plays he's involved in. Again, good, bad, and ugly, not just the good plays, not the highlight tape per se, but highlights and lowlights and everything in between. Some of it was writing up scouting reports of free agents, etc. Some of it was organizing the pre-draft visits, things that we talk about a lot during the pre-draft news cycle. It was a great experience, very hands-on, an opportunity to work with some incredible people. And I don't say that I had a light switch moment, because it really wasn't a light switch moment. I just had a moment in time where I decided that maybe I wanted to not be working inside of football. I think we all, listen, everybody who works in the community that we are in now works hard. There's just a little bit of a different sort of chemical imbalance in the football lifestyle that's tough for some people to take, myself. And I wanted sort of a little bit more out of my life than I was getting in football. Basically my life was eat, sleep, breathe football 24/7, 365, which isn't that different now, but I've got vested rooted interest in things that are outside of football that I have more time for now. So I stopped, I left, I moved back to Boston, took a nice face plant when I tried to get my real estate license, which I did. That wasn't the issue. The issue was I couldn't stand doing that. And then I sort of got that itch again, and I started to scratch that itch for football in my life. And I really, not that dissimilar to probably a lot of people who listen to this podcast. I started the blog, used that blog as sort of my working resume to fish it out to local newspapers, local websites in the Boston area, radio stations, TV stations, etc. And really nobody said anything. Most I got ignores from people that some now I know, some I still haven't met, but pretty much radio silence. I was doing some website work, various places around the web, but really my sort of hook was Mike Reese, who does really, to me, is as good of coverage of a single team as anybody in the country on any sport, any team. Covers Patriots for ESPN. He graciously responded to my email within not even 11 minutes after I sent it. I don't know how Mike was the only person to respond. That happened right away. He's probably the busiest guy that I know. And he asked me to come down and do a little bit of work with him to help out on he asked me, the Patriots in 2012 had 2 first-round draft picks, and this is the era of, of course, the first night being its own event, primetime event. Patriots had 2 picks. You never know with the Patriots what they're going to do, so nice to have all hands on deck. So that was an opportunity in, and one thing I'll say about ESPN that I really enjoyed is that you get in there and you can do one thing. They say, can you do 2? If you can do 2, can you do 5? If you can do 5, can you do 10? And my path is sort of twisted and turned to what I do now, which is, I guess, a smorgasbord. Fantasy football, the podcast with Matthew Berry is certainly a big part of our coverage during the football season, and now some of the off season as well. Fantasy football now is our Sunday morning show, and then NFL Insider, some of the stuff I do on the more sort of news cycle side keeps me busy, or at least basically for, I guess, 11 and a half months a year, save the 2 weeks that we're about to embark upon. Hopefully, I should say, knock on wood, hopefully over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I'm going to take you kind of step by step through the story that you just outlined there. And
okay.
I mean, talk about a wild ride through a lot of different phases. I want to kind of go back to the beginning with when you're spending time with the Chiefs, kind of coaching, because that's a perspective that we haven't had on here so far. We've had Matt Williamson, former NFL scout. Matt Miller talked about like kind of the life of an NFL scout a little bit and why he didn't want to get into it. But the coaching angle is interesting. What is that like? And I know that's a super open-ended question, but I just can't, like, that's a thing I can't imagine, like me talking to a bunch of guys that are bigger and more athletic than me. But that sounds intimidating, especially from a teaching angle.
Yeah, so I'd say this, like, I never held a full-time assistant coach role. My year in Kansas City was spent sort of as Todd Haley, then our head coach's right-hand man, and it was taking on some special projects. So it wasn't like I was a position coach that was working with a group of guys specifically every day, but I can probably still shed a little bit of insight into this, just knowing what the guys that I worked with went through. The coaching lifestyle during the season, it's basically like you leave your house Monday morning and you get back to your house on Friday afternoon. That's basically what it is. And in between that, it's film breakdown and certainly practice. But as you know, it's not like teams have endless amounts of time to practice now in the NFL anymore. It just isn't that way. The CBA is not set up that way. And it's just, a lot of the week is maintenance. You got guys like Marshawn Lynch during the last handful of years of his career who, he wasn't even practicing. Really wasn't practicing during the week. Maybe a little bit of Friday light work or whatever it was, but I know his workload was very light. But the coaching lifestyle is, I always say this: one thing that's sort of like confusing to wrap your head around is the idea that like a coach can pour 100 hours of his life into Sunday, and 50% of them each week could also have poured just 5 minutes of work and gotten the same outcome. I mean, whether you work 5 minutes or 100 hours, if you lose, you lose. So that's the part that I think is it's crazy. You got people who work 100-hour weeks in investment banking, but it's not as if every Sunday their livelihood is redetermined, right? In football, every Sunday you're calibrated or recalibrated. So, but it's the interaction with the players certainly is something that kind of keeps the guys. They kind of like that's sort of the lifeline of the coaching industry is the opportunity to be teachers. That's really what they are. They are teachers, and each one has a different way of going about it. Some of the guys that I spent time around, whether it's Bill Belichick, whether it's a guy like Emmett Thomas who played the game at a Hall of Fame level, defensive backs coach in Kansas City, or whether it's guys who are young. I mean, I worked with Mike Zimmer's son, Adam Zimmer, in Kansas City. He's now in Minnesota, and he's football. He's brilliant. He's unbelievable. He's just got this unbelievable sense about it, and he's so quick on his feet. And for him, a lot of how he's learned, his early on in his career is like, I would say that the technology is so far different from when some of these coaches who've been in the league for 40 years who are drawn up play diagrams, whereas like you got guys who are now, first, second year in the NFL and coaching, and they're doing everything on an app on their tablet. It's just it's an evolving dynamic. But the football coaching lifestyle, I tell you what, those guys, it's not for the faint of heart, but the camaraderie built amongst a staff, whether it's high school, college, or pro level, I can certainly say from the pro level, that's sort of what keeps you going throughout the week. Because if you're not relying on each other, it can be a lonely existence, especially if your team isn't doing all that well. In Kansas City, my first year I'm there, we're 4-12. Second year I'm there, we're 10-6, win the division, make the playoffs, obviously, which was great. But it just has a very different, it can be a very contrasting lifestyle depending on where you are in the NFL.
Yeah, I would imagine that one team is completely different from another. One thing that you hit on there a little bit was the idea of, you can put all these hours into it and then the outcome is still the same, determined in 5 minutes. To me, as a total outsider, that seems like kind of I don't know, in a way, like an inefficient process. Do you think there's like, and I always get this feeling from NFL teams a little bit, and again, being somebody that really doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about because I have never been there. But well, there's a lot of things I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But this especially, I think that sometimes I feel like there's an air of like, this is the way we do things because this is the way we've always done things. Do you think there's a little bit of that in the NFL?
Perhaps. And, it's like, what's it going to take for this to change? How can we possibly move off of this idea that like you have to be in there every single day? I would just say this is that like coaches are creatures of habit. So some of it is born out of a comfort level they derive from knowing that like if I'm in the office every day by 4:30, I know that I can be out of there by 10. I equate preparing to a football game like an exam, studying for an exam. You can study for as long or as little as you want to. It doesn't change that, come Sunday at 1:00 or whenever the test is, you take it like there's a wide range of outcomes. I know some of the hardest workers I've ever been around in the NFL who it didn't matter how hard they worked. If we don't have the players in place or if we don't have the schematic principles in place, we're not going to win. I don't know. The NFL will never be a 9-to-5 job. I certainly can say that much, especially when you factor in that like throughout the course of the day, you're extrapolating, really like 6 or 7 core things that you're doing. You're breaking down film, your meetings, you're doing, spending time in the training room with your player, you're practicing, all these things. But like, there's so much it takes on a life of its own during the day. It's like coaches are losing 5 or 10 minutes here because it's, catching a player in the hallway before a meeting or after a meeting, or it's, working out, which it's so hard to find time for that during the season. But some coaches say the only way I'll ever do it is if I carve out an hour and don't think about ever moving off of that hour, that the days sort of just stack up so easily. And I remember really my first year in Kansas City, there was a stretch, and it was after the regular season and before the draft. It was right during the home stretch. And I was working what we called an in-house scout position, which was basically there were 3 of us at the time in that position, and it was almost like I'm not sure that we were competing against each other, but it was the days were getting longer and longer and longer. But it was actually working in reverse in terms of what it did to my internal system. All of a sudden, I was finding myself refreshed, energized, motivated in a way that I hadn't been, even if I was working 2 or 3 hours less during the day. And I just think that maybe what it spoke to was that it's such a, like gratification-wise, I'm not sure there's anything that I've done that is stacked up to working in the NFL. Maybe it's a little bit of an obsession, too, when you're in the NFL. I think that's what sort of drives some of the very best. But the days never felt as long as they were in terms of hours logged. It kind of just sort of felt like it was just a continuum. And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. I just don't have a perfect answer, but you're right. Do I ever wonder, like, could the NFL or could coaches shave things down by, 3 hours a night, 3 hours a day? Maybe. I just don't know for sure. I don't have a perfect answer as to, all right, like, here are the first 5 things I would cut off my day, because everything feels imperative when you're actually living it.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, when you're doing something, when you're doing a job, even if in the long run it's like meticulous, with the getting to the end goal, it's all that's the satisfying part of it.
Yeah.
I will say that a lot of what you're talking about, the lifestyle and everything, and I've felt this way before listening to you talk about it as well. Like, none of that really appeals to what I would want to do. So I can kind of sympathize with the feeling that you had of, like, I just want something else in my life. Kind of dig a little bit more into that. What was the largest theme of the reason that you wanted to get out of that NFL?
That was definitely part of it. I would say it's like, if I had to do an elevator pitch as to explain it, I had 30 seconds to explain it, is that I've loved football for as long as I can remember. I don't know when I didn't love football in my life. However, for a couple of years in a full-time level, and then also 4 or 5 summers, whatever it was, and then basically all my winter breaks, and in college you get like a month after right after Christmas, you get all this time. So I would just go down to the Patriots Stadium and just grind away on whatever work they needed to have done. I lived football. But doing what I do now, I still love football. I just don't live football every single day. One of the first things that I did when I got back from Kansas City was begin training for a marathon, which that wasn't something that I had been longing for years to do. It kind of just came up suddenly or out of the blue. But it was an example of something that I don't think I had time to train for a marathon during my time in the NFL. I wasn't able to go to my 5-year high school reunion because it fell on a weekend. We were getting ready for the draft. Things like that really, I don't think it sent a shock. I don't think it sent a shock to my system. You just think about it. You just say to yourself, am I going to perpetually be spending time picking and choosing between this versus meaningful life events? And then also hobbies. I mean, to be candid, I don't have a ton of hobbies outside of football. I'm not one of those guys that's like, every day is like, my hours are planned. Like 7 a.m. I'm at the local rec league, and then I do I don't know. I like, what else people do these days? I don't know. Whatever else people do, like, for hobbies throughout the day.
I garden. I don't know.
Garden. And I don't like belong to a cooking club or like the Andrew Luck reading club or anything like that. Like I'm largely football. I play golf, I play tennis, I ski, but I stink at all those, but I still do them. But there's just time in your life for that, which is nice. It's a nice reminder that the world exists outside of football. And it's not like we still don't make, everybody has to make tough choices, in football. And at least my schedule with the NFL is, and not that we all aren't watching football on Sundays, but like I'm in Bristol, Connecticut on Sundays every fall weekend, and I'm there basically Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Sunday. So, it's not like when your buddy says, hey, like we're doing a boys weekend up at the cabin or like whatever, we're going to a bachelor party, or, we're having my wife is having a reunion party or something, like whatever it is. Like those aren't they aren't always layups. It's not always, all right, cool. Like, just tell me where I need to be and when. Sometimes you got to make difficult decisions. So the balance has been better. I'm back closer to my family, which was not necessarily, I was never like against Kansas City as a place. I love the city. It's an amazing, amazing town. I would encourage people to get to if they can, and try the barbecue, of course. But it's certainly nice. It's icing on the cake to be around. I'm one of 3 kids, and it's nice to be within the about an hour of everybody in my immediate family. Yeah,
that's nice. Living across the country,
you know what I'm talking about.
I miss that. Yeah. I will say just a funny story from my own personal life recently. One of my friends, two of my college friends were supposed to come out and visit me. Only one of them ended up making it. One of them couldn't for work reasons. And then his plan was like, I'll buy you guys all tickets to come out to a music festival in Austin, Texas in October. And I was like, dude, are you kidding? I can't go do that in the middle of football
amazing,
season.
right? It'd be unbelievable. We all want to be at like Coachella, or whatever the fall version of Coachella is, or you name it. I want to be there, but the reality is you're just not always there. It's just not always the way it works.
Yeah, and when he's like incredulous, he's like, "Come on, man, I want to buy you a ticket." I'm like, "Dude, bro, I don't even get like 2 days off during the season. It doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen that way. Football is it's 5 months or 6 months of crazy, and 5 months or 6 months of a little bit less crazy.
Right. It's just kind of an agreement. Like, I'm going to just sign my soul away to football for a few months, and then eventually I'll. But it is like it's living the dream every day. I say it all the time on this podcast. I'm the luckiest idiot in the world. But Fields. So, kind of one thing that you mentioned at first, like when you got out of football originally with NFL teams, you didn't jump right into the media side. You took you wanted to get into real estate a little bit, but eventually you got that itch. And you just started a blog, and that's so cool. I mean, and I guess people say that about me too, but it's weird to think of myself that way. That like you go from I just started a blog, and now I work for a big media site.
Yeah, and it was never none of this happened by design. Candidly, I was sitting on Nantucket, which is where my family has a house in the summer, and I was just like, I want to say something happened with Chris Johnson. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was actually this was right at the end of the lockout in 2011 when I started to do this. Maybe it was because football had kind of gotten dormant, and then next thing you know, we've got football again, and all of a sudden we're talking about football in a different way, and maybe that was what really sort of got me excited about it again. And one thing that I would say, and this is not necessarily applicable or not necessarily strictly about football, but I would say if anybody who's listening to this podcast who either is in a career they don't like or not yet gainfully employed, you're still in high school, college, etc. One lesson I learned when I made this transition out of football and then into real estate was that part of the reason why I landed on real estate was it sort of had like my pros and cons list of what I wanted in a new job. And it was less that real estate offered all the pros. It was that real estate offered the fewest number of cons. And rather than doing something because of the things that like work in its advantage, I was stuck on something that was not a disadvantage to me, if that makes sense. So always, because I'd mention something to somebody and they go, well, like I remember actually saying, hey, to someone like, I wonder if sports radio would ever work for me. And I remember one of the first responses was like, yeah, but think about that. Like, let's say you're working at one of the local radio stations in Boston. Like, are you really going to want to watch every single Red Sox game in like the middle of July, like every pitch of every game? It's like they lose some game 15-3. Like, you're going to want to watch the last 3 innings of that game. And I've come to realize now that, like, I don't think every radio host is watching every single second of every single game in the town that he or she covers. But still, I got what the person was saying, but it was like, yeah, good point. I don't want to do that. And it's like, no. Don't think of a radio job through the construct of, all right, well, here's all the crap you have to do that stinks. It's more like you could have 4 hours every day as your medium to reach a broad, wide-ranging audience. And if you find a town like Boston, which again is where I'm from, where the audience is engaged and passionate, like how can you beat that? That's really a neat opportunity for someone. Now, that was not where I ended up, but so I started the blog, and I didn't really know where it was going to go. And again, a lot of fruitless email exchanges where basically I'd reach out to someone and I'd either get nothing back or I would get, hi, I don't really know what to tell you. I can't do anything for you, which is okay. I understand that. But I learned a lot from Mike Reese in that email exchange. First of all, the importance of getting back to people. I work to try to get back to as many people as I can, if not all of them, who reach out and just say, hey, Field, I like you, I don't like you, whatever it is. But, I try to just, even if it's a sentence or two, and just say, hey, I really appreciate that. I know where you're coming from. Like, here's some thoughts. I wish I could tell you that I'm the guy at ESPN that hires people, but I'm certainly not that. So keep your head up, etc. Whatever it is, you know what I'm getting at. I learned some important lessons there. But blogging was, again, I used the term labor of love earlier, and I think it's still where we're at with blogging. And I still think if, again, for people who might be thinking about getting into this medium or this line of work, it's like if I get an email from a youngster who's saying, he or she says, hey, all I want to do is work in sports. And I say, how's your blog? Or how's your podcast? Or how's your YouTube channel? And they say, I don't have one of those. the reality of today's era is that information is available everywhere. So you have to find a way to stand out. And also, like, if I wanted to start my own podcast, I could hang up here and start my own Google Hangout with somebody else, and we'd have a podcast in an hour. It wouldn't be as good as this. It wouldn't be a good one like yours, but it would be a podcast, and next thing you know, you've got a library of content that's developing. And that's what I think is, that was what I realized when I was sort of blogging and just hoping for, and not really necessarily getting, but hoping for an opportunity. And then eventually one came, really through the graciousness of Mike Reese.
Yeah, the just wealth of options is almost overwhelming of ways that you can connect with people out there. I mean, WordPress or Weebly or whatever, like, it's free to make your own website. Doing this is, you host it through YouTube, it's free. If you want to actually put it out there on like iTunes and stuff, that's a little different story. But but there's so many ways to connect with people. Even like Periscope. I don't know if you've ever done one of those, but I've started doing those now, and that's just such a fun way to like talk to people. And even if you're not Matt Harmon or Field Yates, like, just talking about football into a camera is a good process of developing and everything. And there's just so many ways to connect with people now. And it's why the community is ginormous.
Yeah, no, it's crazy how you got your fingertips. I was sitting there, I was taking a bus back home last night, and I was like, hey, I had about maybe another hour left, and I was like, you know what, I should do a Twitter Q&A. I realized my battery was so low, and I was like, something, this is just going to kill my battery. And what would stink more would like have an hour and then like waste my battery in 20 minutes, and then I have 40 minutes of no phone and nothing to do instead. So I managed to get through all but I've got one episode left of Silicon Valley. So I managed to almost get caught up, which I think was the right call in the end. But you're right. It's like, every time you turn, you want to do something, bam, you do it. It's right there. We are at fingertips with information. And it's really cool to see so many people that we probably know in common or follow in common on Twitter, who we probably initially got to know them as a contributor to a website, or maybe even just somebody who had a voice on Twitter, who now they've got podcasts, they've got, extended blogs, whatever it is. We're Facebook friends, you name it. You know them at a different level, which is always, I think, to me, one of the more enjoyable parts of what we do.
Oh, no doubt. Like, making human connections with people. And for me, like, I always kind of still forget that, like, I'm not just a fan anymore or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, because that's I always do that. I'm sure you like feel the same way. It's like some of these people that you talk to, you're like, oh, wait a second, like, I'm friends with these people. And I remember like 5 years ago, like, listening to their podcast, be like, oh man, I wish I could do what they did.
I know. Trust me. It's like there's, I don't know. There are times where you're just like, wait, this is who I work with, or this is who I spoke with, whatever it is. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, it is. And I always say these things, like, not to, and I know the guests do too, not to be like, hey, look at us, we're so cool. But just the fact to be like, shoot, if I could do this, like, you can do this too.
For sure.
That's the empowering part. And part of doing it in field, what you mentioned a little bit earlier, is like standing out. What do you think it was about you that stood out to Mike Reese, or do you think the answer to that question?
I don't know for sure. I have a couple thoughts. I think that maybe my background was a little bit unique. Just having had the opportunity to, people who spend time around the Patriots, even covering them, might have had an idea of who I was when I was running. I mean, I don't look a whole lot older now, even though I am 29. But when you got a 15, 16-year-old running around the training camp practices every single day and following guys like Teddy Bruschi and Mike Vrabel and Rodney Harrison and Asante Samuel around, and at their, everywhere they go, it's like you're part of their shadow. You probably became a little bit, I don't think they knew a whole lot about me individually, but maybe it's like, I remember seeing him around, whatever it was. So that was probably part of it. And then my goal, and this has shifted a little bit as my media career has taken on, was what I sort of tried to focus on early on was find ways to relate my experience when it was appropriate, but not always. Like, there are certain things that happen that in the NFL news cycle that I can't say like, oh yeah, I remember in Kansas City when this happened. Because it didn't happen. Like, I didn't spend 30 years in the NFL. I'm not even 30 years old, but there were some things that happened a couple of years in Kansas City, 4 or 5 years in New England, that it's like, I remember when this, and sort of trying to take peel the curtain back a little bit, without assuming that I was the voice of the authority on all things scouting and coaching. I mean, I know enough to know that I'm a million light years away from that. But ways to sort of tap into that, bring it to the people who are reading my blog. Since then, it's evolved. Like I don't do a ton of stuff day to day where it's like, hey, here's like, what's the scouting side of this? I definitely do some stuff like that, but it's not as if everything I do has to be directly related to scouting. Some of it's news now, or something that I've kind of tried to carve a little bit more of a niche for. And then, of course, the fantasy side, which is, fantasy is like this big tangled web. There's no right or wrong way to do fantasy. Sometimes it's analytics, sometimes, or analytical, I should say. Sometimes it's what do you see with your eyes. Sometimes it's, let's be honest, sometimes it's just one of these, a little dart throw that works out in your favor or doesn't work out.
Amen.
And then sometimes it can be, and again, and there's none of these are foolproof, but sometimes it can be, something like a guy that I trust who works for a team that I know of says, hey, this is a guy you should really keep an eye on. Like, this is a kid who's really made some progress for us. Sometimes you use that in your fantasy, your insight there.
Sure, absolutely. I think I'm trying to get better about combining different methods, and a couple of reception perception articles recently. I've been sure to like reach out to connections, like with the Tyler Lockett one, and specifically, I was like kind of reached out to some people I knew and like, hey, this guy's actually going to be like a big role player for them, right? Like I'm not just going to write about him and he's going to play like half the snaps and get 60 targets. So it's all about kind of combining all of it to me.
Yeah, it is. And I think the fantasy, one thing that I've noticed with the fantasy football community is that like no one is more, and not the people who cover it, but I'd say the people who follow it. There's no community that's more willing to tell you you're wrong when you're wrong. Yes. And I sort of gave up. Gave up is the wrong word, but I don't get too hung up all the time on, most accurate projection player by player each week because it's really hard. I mean, I always tell people there's 22 variables on every single play that determine the outcome of an NFL game. You got 22 players in the field. So I'm going to tell you that like probably next year, 2016, of the 16 weeks that each player, or I guess 17 weeks, but like I'm going to rank Aaron Rodgers ahead of Jay Cutler every single week, barring, like Rodgers breaks his hand or something. Like all things being equal, I'm going to rank Aaron Rodgers ahead of Jay Cutler every single week. There's probably going to be 4 weeks, maybe more, where Cutler actually finishes ahead of Aaron Rodgers. My question is, was I wrong for ranking Rodgers ahead of Cutler? Or is it about the process, a little bit less so about the results? Because the results are what people, turn back to you towards. But the process is what I think we really should all be judged upon. But what I don't think we should. I mean, we can be judged. I don't think it's like the most important part of covering fantasy is judging how someone did or didn't do. But I think the process is what people who are covering fantasy should focus on most specifically, because I'm not saying we have much control over anything, but I guess you do have control over your process and how you get to your ideas, your projections, your forecasts, your rankings.
No, and speaking on the accuracy and the rankings part of it, I always say that like there are people in the community that like that's their thing. Like Mike Clay, who works there at ESPN with you, like he is elite at that. I mean, I don't know how the hell he does it, but he does it. Guys like John Paulson at for 4 for 4, those guys are consistently ranking, very accurately in the top 5 every year. But that I always tell people like that's not me. Don't come to me for the rankings accuracy. Come for whatever it is that people come to me for. They did that's what it is. But and maybe it's a different thing they come to you for. Like that's why there's not one fantasy god. Like there's multiple people of us trying to all get to one place, and they're just different strengths and weaknesses. Even though a lot of our readers or viewers or whatever really just want to know like, okay, do I start this guy or not? Like, give me the order of everybody that's going to score, and that's like you said, very difficult.
Well, think about it this way: everybody has a story of the person in their league who missed the draft and had auto draft on and still won the league, or simply chose their players because like they liked the teams they play for, or like chose the 5 players that they actually knew the names of, and then the rest of them they just like completely took a shot in the dark on players. Like it's not as how often do you leave a draft and say like I feel like that's a pretty good team? To me, honestly, like I don't have too many instances where I leave a draft and say like, that's a big bag of garbage. I feel like it's pretty good. I always like where I'm at after the draft. They're almost, some more than others, but I generally speaking like where I'm at. And next thing you know, I'm like, oh man, like I'm in whatever it is. I'm in 8th place. Like, it's week 10. This stinks. Well, that's fantasy football for you. Like, if it were scientific or algorithmic, there'd be some guy who would be the messiah of fantasy football who would win every single league that he or she played in and probably be worth millions of dollars and probably have some individual service that all of us were subscribing to and paying loads of money for each year.
I was going to say they wouldn't be doing fantasy football if they could have that sort of algorithm to accurately predict everything.
That's right.
Feel
They'd be
yeah.
hopefully, you know?
Yeah, no kidding. I think it's so fascinating, like the kind of the jack of all trades role that you kind of play at ESPN, and especially coming from like an NFL personnel background to now working in fantasy, I would say that you are pretty unique in that way. Is it difficult to juggle all those tasks at all?
I think that last season I sort of had a little bit of a trial by fire situation on my hands, figuring it all out. You know, the NFL, sort of the scouting stuff, which most of the scouting stuff that I do tends to sort of profile towards the writing stuff that I do. I write probably 50 or so columns per year for ESPN Insider. And then sometimes we're able to get into it on NFL Insiders or some of the other TV coverage that I do. You know, the fantasy football podcast that I'm part of, the Fantasy Focus, with Matthew Berry and then Stefania Bell and Daniel Dopp, our producer, you know, that to me was probably the most significant adjustment for a few reasons. First of all, the podcast had been around for 7 years with not a good host, but a great host in Nate Ravitz. It wasn't as if I was replacing somebody because that person was a total bum and couldn't hack it anymore. It was Nate who had so much on his plate in other sectors of ESPN that he walked away from. You know, he said, I got to take a step back here for a second. And then also knowing that, like, the podcast is, and I'm not naive. I'm not naive to what the audience is looking for in that podcast. It's a podcast of people, many of which are, you know, incredibly dedicated, loyal listeners to Matthew, who for good reason. So finding a way to serve as kind of the point guard of the podcast, injecting some personal touch and some flair, which is something that sort of every podcast I grow a little bit more and more into. Also trying to offer value, knowing that we're not working against the clock. It's a podcast. In essence, you can go for as long as you want, but knowing that, like, you know, the audience's earbuds start to slide out a little bit more, you know, 35, 40, 45 minutes. It's not like everybody wants to listen to an hour and 20-minute podcast every single day. There's just not time for that in everybody's day.
No, for sure. Podcasting and writing and, you know, being on camera, totally different skills. I tell people that all the time. Like, you know, we talked about this on just actually the most recent episode with Chris Heil, who's now no longer part of the industry. He's kind of left, and he was saying, like, you know, podcasting right in his lane, but writing not at all. You know, and again, that kind of comes back to different skill sets. I want to ask you, and maybe for selfish reasons, for my own career path, but I'm going to ask anyways. Getting on TV, what was that like? How did it happen? Did they approach you, or did you kind of put yourself out there? And two, what are the skill sets that are completely different from just everything else?
So the ESPN approached me, but it was not like you know, a bunch of time in the making. I got a call from someone who said, "Do you want to come meet with a guy named Seth?" Thinking to myself, a guy named Seth. All right, who is Seth? And I come to realize that Seth is Seth Markman, our coordinating producer of the NFL coverage at ESPN. Sort of, you know, he's the head honcho of the NFL and at ESPN. And I mean, no sport is more popular than the NFL. And ESPN's a big media company. So, you know, you want to make sure you're on your best behavior and sharp when you speak to Seth, who, this is my initial impression of him, and that's still the case. Seth also, I now know him to be, like, you know, just a great guy who I now, like, you know, we're much more friends. We're still, I'm still, you know, someone who works for him, but, you know, I consider him a friend now, not just someone that I call my boss. So I got a call to go meet with Seth, and we talked about some potential opportunities. And, you know, think about, like, I didn't train, I didn't do classes, but I'll never forget the first time that I was on NFL Insiders. I think it was August 6th of 2013, so almost 3 years ago. And I remember having a moment just before the camera went on for the show to begin, and I'm thinking to myself, I know there are a lot of people watching, but all I see is like 4 cameras in front of me. So I can either pretend like, you know, the weight of the world is on my shoulders, or just have fun with, like, I'm talking about football. I'm not covering, you know, situations of serious depth and magnitude. I'm talking about football. If someone gets pissed off at me because I don't like the fact that I think the Jaguars are going to go 6-10 this year and not 10-6, I hope the Jaguars go 10-6. I hope every team wins every game. Like, I like we all like shining a positive light on a player or a team. That's like, I mean, I think if you have a sort of good-hearted soul, that's not like an uncommon thing. The problem is, like, part of our job is to be honest in our assessment and be realistic in our assessments. So you invariably find people that don't agree with what you say or don't agree with what you do. And that part you just learn to live with. It's fun. It's funny for me. No sweat off my back. You get a lot of random crap on social media. But you know something? If you can't have fun with it, then you're in the wrong business, I think. So for me, TV was, I remember sort of having this realization that I can go one of two ways. I can constantly be sitting there sweating, thinking about all the people watching it, or I could just have fun with it. And I know I will never be the smartest person when it comes to football in the world. But I also know that, like, we should all, if you're going to do it, you should always believe, like, you should always do your best to prepare accordingly. And, excuse me, just be prepared for the fact that, there's a far shorter sort of like segment breakdown for each segment on television than there's on podcasting. So, excuse me, clear my throat here. You're always preparing to have your best, have your best points lined up. Almost have a hierarchy of information within each topic, because you're not always going to get to it. And sometimes even what they tell you you're going to get to, hey, we're going to have you on for 45 seconds talking about this point, why Jameis Winston's going to break out in year 2. You might get to the segment and you might have 20 seconds. So whatever you think you have in 45, if you can't compress it to 25 or 20, that's on you. So the TV, to me, it's the most gratifying thing that we do, that I do, I should say. I don't know if it's like this mini adrenaline rush that comes right before every segment, but to me, it's always been so much fun. And the people really do make any line of work that you are in. And the people that I work with at ESPN, and I'm not exclusively talking about the people that you see on the camera, but the behind-the-scenes team, and again, I haven't spent a bunch of time with a bunch of different networks, is unparalleled. It's just ridiculously cool to see so many people that are so aligned and so dedicated towards making a television program, a segment, whatever it is, a special, a taped TV show, whatever it is, making it as the best they can make it.
That's awesome. And brevity, for sure. You mentioned that. Something that I struggle with, that I'm trying to get better at. But
I can't do it myself, so I'm struggling hard.
No, I was going to say, well, I mean, clearly I can tell just from podcasts with you, we're both talkers. We could sit here and do this thing for hours, but it's a little different on TV. And I'll tell you, hope this doesn't come off as weird as I tell you this, but I can remember, like 3 years ago, watching your first segment on TV on ESPN. Like I can remember that and being like, yeah, and just even feeling like, because you're a few years older than me, and being like, damn, like, okay, I could, like, that could be me someday. I could maybe not. I've never ever imagined that I would be on TV, nor was that ever like a goal. Mine was just like, I just want to write about football, and whatever happens. But like, it was one of those inspiring feelings, like seeing somebody be really successful at something, inspire, that's like, a little older than me. It was inspiring to see that and be like, that's awesome. Like, there's somebody that's like moving his way up the ladder. I want to get on that ladder. I want to do that thing too. And I think that having, role models and seeing people like succeed. And again, this comes back to like that thing earlier, like feel like it's weird that I'm even doing a podcast with you right now. It's pretty sick, but that's life, that's life. And it's important to be inspired by people that way.
Well, I think also that, like, it's such a cliche, but we talk about like age being just a number. And I'm telling you, like, I don't go on the set with anybody and think to myself, like, man, I'm 25 years younger than that guy or girl, that man or woman. I just think of it as like, what can I contribute to this conversation? We have a lot of fun with the age thing, especially on the podcast, just because it is an easy thing to sort of just like loop back to as a running bit.
We're going to talk about that for sure.
Yeah. But something Matthew and I, like, I mean, at least I don't look at Matthew and say, like, the reason why he is so good at what he does is because he's just been doing it long enough. Like, you're bound to get good when you do it for a long enough time. I look at Matthew or Stefania and I think to myself, like, they have this incredible skill set that translates, like, it's not just knowledge they have, it's taking that knowledge and publishing it to the world in a way that people gravitate back towards.
Yeah, I remember, I think I've probably told this story on the podcast before. I think I probably just keep recycling the same stories, but hey,
I'm good at that too.
Yeah, like I remember the first time I met Sigmund Bloom in one of our football guys retreats in Las Vegas. He told me, he's like, you're clearly, and I was 23 at the time. I'm 24 now. And he was like,
You're getting old, brother.
Yeah, I know. I'll be 25 in August, dude. That's like quarter away to 100, which
yeah.
I know. It's basically like I should probably just start planning, my retirement because it's almost all over. But I think it was like what he said to me. He's like, you're clearly the youngest person here, like not even close. He's like, but use that to your advantage because people are going to pick on you about it. But just remember, they're doing it just because they're jealous. But, like the Sigmund Bloom's a guy that he's older than me, but he's not where he is because he's older than me. Like you said, he's good at it. If you're good, you're young, they'll find you. If you're bad and you're young, you won't get anywhere. Just the same as like, if you're bad and you're old, you'll get weeded out. It's all about quality, not necessarily a number. But Field, you mentioned the age thing on the podcast, and I kind of just want to like get into which is the fun part about having a following, as weird as that is to say, an audience, is that you get like kind of a personal connection with people. And I see a lot of people tease you about the age, and like, which is funny to me because I'm even younger than you are or whatever, but. I see like you had a birthday recently, and like you held up like your learner's permit or your fake driver's license.
Big day, faked. I didn't. People actually thought that that was the first day I got my driver's license. I was having fun with it. I just walked down to the local driving school, which is like a 10-minute walk from me. And I think it went off even better than I expected it to. So it was pretty fun.
No, but it's cool. Like having that relationship with your audience, I think, and just being able to honestly, like, you mentioned taking shit from people and everything, showing people that you can laugh at yourself and like laugh at the joke, like not take yourself, it would be one thing if, people were saying to you, "Yo, you're so young," or, this, that, and you were like getting defensive about it. But being able to kind of ride into the current is important in our industry.
There are two things that I get the most flack for by far, publicly: my age and my name. I have no control over either one of those things. I hate to break it to people. I'm 29. I'll be 29 until I turn 30 next April. My name is Field. It's going to be Field. It's been Field for the past 29 years. It's going to be Field for the next however many years that I live. I don't have any control over those two things. Now, if you have a problem with me because of something that I said, I guess I mentioned earlier, like I can't really do a lot about that. I mean, I'm talking within the construct of the sort of like the moral compass. If I say something that's completely out of line, I deserve to be called out for it. But if you have a problem with me saying like, hey, I think that this player is better than that player, like opinions are hard to sometimes people don't like to hear them. So I go to bed every night, rest easy. I don't mean some nights better than others. But like, if you sort of believe in the process and believe in like the carbon of yourself, then you should be okay with dealing with the people that either mean it sincerely or have a light. Now I get all this fun, like completely random hate. It's venom, but it's like fake venom. It's it's like it's very lighthearted. So I enjoyed that a lot, and just finding ways to make brush it off. I'm sure there'll be a day where someone will have a wall of all of my like greatest screw ups in fantasy football, like the things that I thought were going to work out. Or that I thought were not going to work out, and I was completely wrong. That person will probably have that sooner rather than later, excuse me, and they'll probably still have, like, I don't know, 500 things that they didn't catch of mine that I was wrong on. Like, it's just the nature of what we do, Like, if you want to deal in a world that's, like, you're always going to be right, I'm not sure what that is, but it isn't fantasy football.
No, that's for sure. And, there are about 300 things that people can and do tease me about, and it's it's fun, and I think that just show
not the hair, though. Not the hair.
No, for now, until I lose it, and that is coming. Unfortunately, we're riding out the hair thing for as long as we can, but eventually it will be gone. I've already learned to accept that. But those are like the people that I know, like they're really kind of. It's a way to show, it's like your friends. Your friends make fun of you all the. Well, I don't know about you, but my friends make fun of me all the time.
It's great. I'm like the easiest punching bag there is of stuff to make fun of me for. So you just own it, like like I want to bust some chops back. That's just the way it works.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Like if you can tease me, and I will probably I'll mess with you right back. Like I still know who I always say I know who my real people are, because they'll still make fun of me for Cordero Patterson when all the people that give me praise and high fives for Allen Robinson. There's still my real people back in the day. They remember when I used to like Cordero Patterson, but that is a story for another podcast.
Yeah, no one needs a bounce back here. I guess not a bounce back, but no one needs a bounce up year from Melvin Gordon more than I do. I'm just telling you right now.
Yeah, we're all like always quietly rooting for those back. Like, come on, man, just do it for like it's so stupid. It's like do it for me. Really, like it's like do it for your career because that's what's important. But but in a way, in a way, like do it for me too. Like if the Chiefs could just throw like 120 balls to Albert Wilson this year, like for me, that would be great. But that's again a story for another podcast. But kind of winding down here, I really appreciate your time. For sure. And one thing I've been asking people a lot recently, is there one thing like in the community, whether it's the fantasy community or the industry at large, that you see that you don't really like or you don't really care for, or you just wish was a little different?
This might be maybe sort of extends beyond the fantasy football community, but I'm sort of, and maybe I'm just a power of positivity guy by nature, but I'm surprised that there are people who have platforms, some bigger than others, that they're so predisposed to use it to either expose negative takes or present negative opinions about people. Like, I'm not trying to be like, cheerio, like the world is just always going to be easy and everything is great. I know it's not how it works. You know what I mean?
If there's a place to be positive and to be overly leaning towards the positive side of things, this is the podcast for
Yeah, so I'm just always surprised at how, even and sometimes happens like there are times where I'll present an opinion and people like the first response will be, "Really? Like, you really think that?" It's like maybe take a step back and say, rather than asking "really," think to myself, "All right, I wonder why." Matt or Field is saying that. Like maybe I can see it. All right. Okay, cool. Gotcha. All right, cool. So I think that like there's just like this leaning on, there's such a desire to, I guess, be the next best person with the next best negative take. That's a little bit interesting to me. We're lucky for what we do though, like we're lucky for what we do. We talk about football for a living. It could be a lot worse, So I'd say for the most part, that's the one thing that I don't necessarily agree with. But all things considered, like it's not a bad gig we've got going.
No, certainly not. I again always come back to the fact that I'm incredibly lucky to be here, incredibly fortunate, and it's awesome. It literally is the dream come true. Field, this is a question I ask for some people who are bigger names in the industry or whatever, and I would put yourself in there, obviously. But
paying you to say that, thank you though.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, it evens the ledger. Like I was going to pay you for this appearance, but now that I said something nice about you, I don't have to. So
okay, cool. Good.
But what do you think is the next step for you, or what's your end game? Is the stupid way I like to phrase it.
Yeah, I don't have an end game. I think about this all the time, especially because I'm 29. I'm not married, but my friends are all getting married or engaged. So you start to think. I know you start to think about like what's life's next step. I really like what we do. You know what I mean? Like I've got my interest outside of football that I mentioned earlier. Not a ton of them, but like if you ever want to find a crappy golf partner, just give me a call. I'll be right there to hack it with you for a little bit. The end game is like I think that part of the reason why I find the podcast so enjoyable is that I think there are people that show up there for fantasy football insight, but really what they're showing up for is an hour of not bar talk, but what sort of amounts to bar talk with people that they feel like they've gotten to know. And to me, that's fun. And end game, I'm not sure, but like if I can be regarded as someone who people enjoy listening to and they think provides a shred of insight, that to me is at least a good starting point. And the reason why I get a little bit less focused on the end point is, like I tell people 10 years ago, if you had said I wanted to do a podcast as my job, people would say, what the heck is a podcast? Like, or 10 years ago, people probably said, all I want to do is be, the back page newspaper columnist for my local paper. And, I love the newspaper as much as anybody else, but I think we understand it's an evolving medium. People are consuming news in a different way.
Yeah, it's certainly hard to think about the end game when even like you mentioned 10 years ago, like a year and a half ago, if you told me that I was going to be here, not sitting on my floor here talking into my computer, but in a larger sense, I probably would have slapped you anyways and called you crazy. So yeah, it's all about living in the moment. But Field, again, I want to really thank you for your time here. One thing I always do right at the end that some of the guests like, some of them don't, is I just give you the floor to say whatever the hell you want before we get out of here. Before I rip the floor out from under you, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me on the podcast. That is very cool. I think you're doing a good job. I mean, I think it's cool that you're taking, you are bringing the fantasy football community together in so many ways, but not necessarily because of fantasy football, not about fantasy football. It's cool to sort of, get a glimpse into each person's life. And I guess if I take the floor for a second, I'm looking forward to this upcoming NFL season. That will be like my takeaway is that like, hopefully people look at the fantasy football. I always tell people that like, fantasy football is endlessly fun, So people who are listening to this who might be fantasy football, avid fantasy football players, like I know you're probably going to disagree with something that I say. We'll probably get into some little back and forth on Twitter about why players rank too high or too low, but like just have fun with it, Like it's something that originally started off probably as an idea of someone who was like, this would be an intriguing way to add some extra value to a game. Like, let's keep it at that, Doesn't have to be so serious all the time.
Right. Hey, don't take yourself so seriously. Don't take any of this so seriously. I think those are very good parting words for sure. Field, again, thank you so much for stopping by. This was really fantastic. I'm glad we got to do this after a lot of jumping around schedule wise. So really, thank you so much for your time.
All because of me, by the way. If anybody's still listening, it's my screw up that I'm like. I'm crushing Matt with my constantly evolving. I need to either get a travel agent, which I can't afford, or I need to get like a handbook to carry around to make sure I have everything kept up to date.
Oh man, I don't know how I'm doing. I don't know how I'm keeping a functioning schedule, because that's like, oh God, I can remember back in second grade, like my teacher just pulling out this crumpled bit of paper that was my agenda that they had us keep. So yeah. I don't know how the hell I'm working it through this world, but we're all making it happen. And again, it happens, and that's all that matters. So for everybody out there that's listening, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if you could continue to share the show, rate and review on iTunes. We are coming down to the end of season 1 here, and this has really been just an awesome journey for me to go on with you guys. And I look forward to bringing you some more great guests, and we have a few more lined up. So look forward to it. And in the meantime, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned something today.